Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 410 of the Running Rogue podcast. This is your host, Chris McClung, joined by James Dodds in what will be his last episode recording with me, unless we get a cameo down the road somewhere. That is sad and also exciting in its own ways. We're recording today, continuing our conversations on mental training, mental prep. We're on to chapter 24 of the book, episode 410 of the podcast. We're going to be talking about self-talk, visualization, and teeing up a little conversation on problem solving that will also segue us into the next episode and chapter 25. Today will be our last episode of July because I'm going on vacation for a couple of weeks, so we're going to miss a couple of weeks, but we'll be back the first week in August. Anyway, how are you, James?
I'm doing well. I'm surviving the monsoon that seems to be building.
Yes, we've getting rain here in Austin, which is good. I think it's welcome for the most part because we had pretty wet spring, but then we had a really dry summer so far. So it's good to get a little bit of rain. Although I think some of the areas around here have probably gotten it a little bit tougher.
Yeah.
I guess it was sitting sort of northwest of San Antonio, southwest of Austin for a long time overnight and this morning, and they got a bunch of rain there. So some potential flooding, which is always a little bit scary in these parts.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully everybody's okay. But yes, it's been a lot of rain today.
Yeah. And not to go too dark or anything, but especially on the heels of last year in that Kerrville area.
Yeah.
So I know, I have close friends that said there was 20 inches, I think, in 24 hours. And of course, that brings back a shock because July 4th last year was pretty rough on that area of Texas.
Yes. So hopefully everybody's okay. I think at a minimum, there'll be better awareness of what's happening. So there's that. But anyway, we're here to talk about mental training. And I kind of want to frame this episode in a specific way by asking you a question, getting your real-time reaction, because when people hear the word I'm going to use in the question, I think sometimes they roll their eyes or think it's baloney or whatever. But what we're going to talk about today, from my perspective, is the tactics to actually make this thing happen. So what do you think about when you think about the word manifesting or manifestation? And do you think it's a thing?
I absolutely think it's a thing, but perhaps not in the way that people think about it when they reject it. So this is off the cuff, but I would say manifestation is almost like a higher order word that includes both visualization, statement of purpose and why, and action, like the holistic experience. It's sort of like if you want to say you manifested something, it probably started with, let's say, a dream in your sleep or even a daydream of like, I kind of want something. But then that daydream, you like keep dancing with it a little bit and keep playing with it a little bit. And you start to sharpen it and you're like, I want that. And you say out loud that you want it and you keep working backwards. Well, like, how would I get that? And you start almost inching into what would be mapping and planning. And so you're like, I wonder if I could get that. And then what would I need to do to get that? And then when you define what you need to do to get that, then you're like, could I take one small little step? So it's this holistic, like, to me, manifestation is not sitting alone in a room saying, I'm going to make my legs be able to break 3 in the marathon and then just sign up for a race and expect it to happen.
Right.
It's the holistic, like you dream it, even if you don't know where the dream came from. You dance with the dream, you ask how, maybe you start with a curious sense of wonder and then you start asking how, and then you start planning, then you start mapping, then you start acting, then you commit to it until you get it and you just never back off. So it's a holistic thought for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're dead on, and I agree with all of those sentiments. You know, when people, I think, roll their eyes at that word, they think of it in the sort of sense of like magic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, oh, if I think about something, it'll happen to me. And while thinking about something is part of it, it's not the whole bit of it. And the tactics of manifesting things to happen to you are all the things we've been talking about, and the stuff we'll drill in today. It's the statement of purpose, it's the vision board, it's the goal setting. And then as we get further down the line of execution on manifestation, it includes some of the things we're going to talk about today. Self-talk, visualization, and ultimately problem solving when things don't go your way. And so I want to frame it that way because I want people to understand that if you want something to happen to you, or if you have a goal, if you want something out there, you're dreaming about something, then this is what action towards that looks like. And while some people might paint it as silly or cheesy, it's stuff that really works. And we wouldn't be talking about it in the book if it didn't work. And so if you want something in your running life, or really in any part of your life, some of the things we'll talk about today are a part of that journey, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
So yes, you can manifest. But manifestation isn't magic. It's a lot of work.
You know, maybe we already covered it, but you just have my wheels turning now. And it's like, it's interesting because I think someone who hasn't sort of reached a goal or sort of grasped what it is that they want, if they see, again, like some kind of weirdo sitting on a couch being like, I'm just going to manifest with my brain, so easy to reject. But what I think is more interesting to meditate on or think on is these great, I'm thinking of World Cup right now, because that's what's going on. But you quoted the Aaron Rodgers example recently. And it's like, what's interesting is the guys that are, and gals, like, I mean that generally of everyone, the humans that seem to be at the top of their game on a genetic level and on a work ethic level also do this. They'll say, I've seen it go in the goal, in the net, thousands and thousands and thousands of times. It's sort of like they would never go and say, that's the only reason why I'm successful. But if you say, at all the hard work that you've done, what else? They'd be like, and I saw it in my mind, like a both and instead of an either or.
Yep. So the mind is a powerful tool, and we're going to encourage you to put it to work in your favor along this line of making things happen. Doesn't mean it'll be easy. Doesn't mean it'll come without failure, but these are some of the steps. One of the big ones, and by the way, you know, all of this stuff is also scientifically backed. So it's not just woo-woo stuff that we're making up. It's all scientifically backed. Self-talk, visualization, these are all tools that are scientifically backed to prove helpful. Starting with self-talk, this can manifest, using that word in a different way, in a bunch of different ways. We'll talk specifically about a few. When I think about self-talk, I think about affirmations and I think about mantras. Those are kind of the two categories of things I think about, especially when you're talking about specific application of self-talk. But speaking about it first, more generally, self-talk is that inner dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I think is really important in manifesting a positive outcome in your life or in your running life is recognizing that inner dialogue and where it's helping you and where it's holding you back. Because for many of us, there are negative thoughts in your brain. There's the devil on your shoulder. There's doubts that creep in, anxieties, fears. All of those things are normal. And yet they also can be barriers to what you want, because they're that whisper in your ear that's telling you you can't when you can. And so when we talk about self-talk, it's both and both the positive stuff and the negative self-talk. And what we're doing when we speak to ourselves in our brain is we're essentially programming ourselves. It's the programming language that's running through your mind. And if you're feeding your mind with positive programming language, generally positive outcomes will come. If you're feeding your mind with negative programming language, at least predominantly negative, the negative outcomes will come. And that's not to say that negative thoughts are bad. They are a reality of everyone who faces big goals. You're going to have them. But we want to mix shift it, right? We want to go from maybe predominantly negative thoughts or doubts to predominantly positive thoughts and belief, and mix shift it so that gradually over time, those negative thoughts, the devil on your shoulder is a quieter voice, whereas the positive thoughts are a louder voice. Much easier said than done, and we'll talk about some of the tactics to get there, but that's framing up a little bit of what we're trying to accomplish with self-talk.
Mm-hmm. Should we go into some examples? Or I mean, I don't know why, but the thing that's popping in my mind right away, because you were mixing the like negative and the positive, it's like there's, when it comes to the negative, at least, like in interrupting that pattern and trying to move over towards something more positive, I would say at the very least, like learn to separate action from identity. And that's tough because we hear things like what you do repeatedly is what you will become. And so, I'm trying to honor the fact that like they're very closely related, but it's so incredibly important to, instead of saying something like, I'm slow, you would say something like, I ran slower in that workout than I anticipated, right? Like you're reviewing the workout as opposed to reviewing yourself. Because once it attaches to identity, which is also a recommendation by a lot of great authorities, is to, shape your identity and invite it into the things that you're doing and that you want the most. But you have to be careful when you're going to get critical or get negative. Again, it's not saying that we don't experience negative emotions, that we ignore them, that we suppress them. But I think that the first thing that came to mind when you were discussing self-talk is that at least interrupt action from identity or separate those two.
Yeah, and you're talking about recognizing and reframing essentially negative thoughts. We have a whole section on that in the book. The example you gave is perfect. I'm slow, because it is a classic runner example. Mm-hmm. I'll hear that all the time, particularly in newer runners or people that might be new to us. They'll say, "Oh, I'm slow," or "I'm not a runner." Those are two phrases I get a lot. And the first step in shrinking the negative thoughts or taking it to a smaller percentage of your brain is recognizing them, mm-hmm. noting them without judgment, so that you can then reframe them. But you've got to do the recognition part first. Some people might not even realize that they're saying that about themselves, or they may think it's normal, or they may think it's true because maybe that's what they've been told. And so first, being able to recognize that you're calling yourself slow, or in the case of the educational example I think I gave several episodes ago, some people growing up will say, "Well, I'm just bad at math." But you're creating a story that is becoming an identity that isn't actually true. Mm-hmm. If you were to work on it. So I'm slow, noting, observing it, even potentially journaling or writing it down, and then creating a list of those things that are the negative thoughts that you tend to lean into, and then reframing them. I liked your reframing. I also like to reframe the I'm slow conversation to never use the word slow, but rather to use the word degrees of fast. Mm-hmm. Like, I am a different degree of fast than maybe those people around me, but I am still fast if I'm out here working on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So changing that from slow to degree of fast is a simple way to reframe it from negative to at least neutral,
Mm-hmm.
maybe even positive, right? So that's one example. I am not a runner. To simply, I am a runner because I am putting one foot in front of the other. And there are other examples that we could give, but the first step in all of this is just recognizing and starting to reframe those thoughts in your mind. And I think that process, or a commitment to that process, requires belief that those thoughts need to be reprogrammed.
Mm-hmm.
And we've already talked about that a little bit, but it's really, really important to believe that, and to believe that it matters. The difference between calling yourself slow and calling yourself a lesser degree of fast,
Mm-hmm.
or a different degree of fast.
Again, responding off the cuff, I'm just thinking of action-oriented statements. And you just hit on that one, but I'll stick with that same example of I'm working on getting faster. I even like that a lot better than I'm not as fast as I'd like to be yet. But perhaps you start there. You hear yourself write or say something like I'm slow. And it's like, no. Let me just work on that and say, all right, I'm not as fast as I'd like to be yet. Okay, I don't even love that because it still starts with I am. So get away from that. What am I doing? I'm working. I guess it's still I am, but I'm working on getting faster.
Right.
Putting yourself back towards an action as opposed to just a state of being.
Yeah, and framing it in a positive sense. Important part of the process. But first, make notes, journal. What are those thoughts, those recurring devil on your shoulder thoughts that come into your brain? It might be, for some people, I can't do that. I will never be a sub 4-hour marathoner. Well, you could reframe that as I am working to be, or I am not yet.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you work hard enough, we believe that we're going to, we'll probably get you there. And so that's, again, a simple way of turning the I can't to I can, or I will, or I won't. Possibly, at least give yourself a little window of possibility. And so that's another example simply of noting and reframing, and then just recognizing when it pops up in your brain in a negative way and consciously reframing it into that positive way. I think it's amazing how many times you might realize these thoughts are coming into your head without maybe noticing it until you start to notice it. It's kind of like when you're looking for maybe a certain type of car, you suddenly start to see it everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think you gave this example last week or maybe the week before. And this is the same thing. Once you start realizing that you're telling yourself you're slow all the time, or calling yourself slow, or referring yourself as slow, then you'll start to see it's happening a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can start to work on changing that script.
Mm-hmm.
So reframe those negative thoughts. The second part, and this is where we get to, the category of self-talk that I call affirmations, but we want to recreate or create a positive script to help program the mind to think positive thoughts versus to think the negative thoughts that might be your crutches. So with that, I like to encourage people to create positive self-talk or affirmations that they can say to themselves. Put in visible places, on your bathroom mirror, on your refrigerator, on your car dash. It could also be maybe something that's not something you see, but you like the perfect example of the password change to recognize the affirmation you're trying to make stick. But this is a word or phrase, maybe a sentence, that takes some of those negative self-talk themes that pop up for you frequently and offset them and reprogram them to be a positive thing. And this is very personal, very individual. And it's going to be something that's specifically targeted towards the things that you struggle with mentally. But we want you to think about it, write out those new phrases or sentences, post them somewhere, and then say them to yourself. Looking in the mirror, saying it out loud in your car. Again, silly, cheesy perhaps to some people, but it helps to reprogram that negative script into a positive one.
Mm-hmm. I thought of two things there. One, stealing again from Charlie Munger quotes. It was either Charlie Munger or Warren Buffett on this one. I don't remember because obviously easy to mix those two up. But one of them said that they always practice 3 at least anytime something goes wrong. And to me, I was thinking of the idea of gratitude. I'll often try to just focus on gratitude in general. But I think they go well together, so you can use either one. But it's I'll go direct from the let's just say Berkshire Hathaway quote, and that would be if I spilt coffee on myself, I try to say, well, at least I have another shirt. At least I have time to actually change my shirt. And I forget what the third was. It was one of their examples. But for me, I started using that with like things. I like to say like, well, shoot, like if you're a runner and a workout goes bad, well, it's like, well, thank goodness I know exactly what went bad. And thank goodness that I have access to a podcast that's absolutely free. I can actually get the information and the resources that I need in order to get better. Thank goodness that I didn't overtrain and I'm able to hit this again next week and I'll do better next time. Thank goodness I'm even considering this thought right now because that's keeping my head in the game. Like you can practice this whole like at least or thank goodness in the spirit of, and I guess I'm compelled to go after this just because I know what it's like to get buried in the like down and out thoughts on a bad workout or a bad race or a bad week or whatever it may be.
Yep. Yeah, and that's just the simple gratitude practice that can be helpful on this journey, is because that's basically a daily or maybe a couple times a week practice of taking the negative, so to speak, and noting what you're thankful about regardless.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Kara Goucher talks about this, and she had her first book was actually a gratitude journal that basically showed and modeled how she used a gratitude journal to switch the negative thoughts in her head, you know, when she was a pro runner. And that would be something that I would encourage you to do if you struggle with this, is be able to always find the positive. On a day like today, hot, muggy morning here in Austin. It wasn't raining yet when my athletes had their Wednesday workout. We wished it was raining because it was that thick in the air. And a lot of people, we were doing the marches today, struggled a little bit on the workout. But the fact that they showed up and did work is a massive win.
Mm-hmm.
Be thankful for that. The fact that they showed up and maybe they didn't do the paces they wanted because it was hot and humid, but the efforts were dead on. At a minimum, they got to say hello to their friends, you know, and so there's a lot of things you can be thankful for. So that's another practice of creating a gratitude journal or reframing the negative with thankful thoughts that can come with this idea of positive self-talk. Flipping the script,
Mm-hmm.
as they say. So affirmations, gratitude work and practice, great tools. But it requires a little bit of work and practice, I think, is one thing to note here. You're not going to naturally think of these things until you start to work on it. And as you gave those examples, there's often many, many layers of gratitude you can pull out of a situation. And I think it takes practice identifying them
Mm-hmm.
and noting them. And so if you can get a journal and every time you do a run, write something positive about it, then that's a great way to start.
Mm-hmm.
Because it could be, I got up and did it. It could be, I saw some beautiful flowers today.
Mm-hmm.
Could be, got to hang out with my friends. Could be, I nailed my paces. Could be a lot of different things, but you start to uncover as you practice it, the many, many layers of positivity that can come from any situation, regardless of how bad it might seem on the surface.
Mm-hmm. What came to me when you said, I got up and did it, was I was going to anchor, and I'm trying to think of like the skeptics right now, because there is I want to honor the skeptics real quick. There is such a thing in the therapy world called spiritual bypass, and I only know that because I was guilty of it when I was much younger. I was just this happy, jovial It was like, no matter what, I'm smiling, right? And my counselor, one of the first things he told me, he was like, dude, you see the silver lining before you even take note of the fact that there is a dark cloud. He was like, come on, we're going to have to talk real. So where I'm going with this, and I want to honor the skeptics, is that there is a tilt that goes too far. And that's lying to yourself. Like when you actually try to bend reality to fit your agenda. So those that are skeptical, I want to honor that and say, like, yes, there is an extreme in another direction, but you still need to be wary of the consequences of a negative thought train that you will spiral down if you don't catch it. And so another good starting point, I would say, is if someone's in that bucket, is learn to be objective. Like, I like the word sterile. So if you're not ready to go to positive just yet, be as sterile and objective as possible. I got up. Right? I did X workout, X volume at X pace. I'm both subject and scientist. I'm just looking at myself or looking at the situation or looking at the workout and saying, these are objective facts about my reality. Now, here's where it starts to turn positive when you take on that existential mindset. I have a choice right now. I get to do something about this very objective, hard, sterile reality. I can add to it or I can take from it. And now you're inviting yourself into an opportunity to say, I think I want to add to it. Because if I have a goal, I could spend the next 30 minutes beating myself up and going backwards, but look at it through the lens of efficiency. Again, a very sterile and objective approach. It's just like, is it more efficient to spend 30 minutes beating yourself up? Or is it more efficient will you get to your goal sooner if you state the facts and ask yourself, what else can I do to add to my situation? I think like that's a doorway that the most skeptical of skeptics could walk through in this little idea of positive self-talk.
I like it. I like it.
I got a little passionate there and I didn't mean to.
It's good. So digging into some of the examples of affirmations that you might create for yourself, and sometimes these might be just the opposite of the negative thoughts that you struggle with. But we talked about the I am slow mentality that some might have, or that might be a story baked in their heads. What if your affirmation simply was, I am fast? Or if you had worry about whether you could reach a certain goal, what if your affirmation was, I will reach that goal? And that doesn't mean or necessarily guarantee that you'll get there, but it puts you on a pathway to believe that it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and obviously we could go on. We could go on and list many examples, and everybody thinking or listening to this is going to have their own. But if you think it's silly to look into a mirror and say, I am fast, or I can get a certain goal, or I will get a certain goal, then just try it.
Mm-hmm.
Just do it. It will feel silly. It'll feel strange. But trust me, as someone who was maybe not overtly in the silly camp, but who was maybe a little bit sheepish and embarrassed to try some of this stuff when I first got into my coaching journey, as someone who has now done it, it's really powerful. And yes, it takes perhaps some adjustment to the feeling of it because it's uncomfortable. And I think naturally we're better at beating ourselves up than we are at telling ourselves positive things. So when you start to do that, it just feels a little weird and uncomfortable. But once you get into it, you're like, okay, this actually feels kind of good. Mm-hmm. I can dig it. So we want to flip that script. And then as you listen to that, you might say, well, if I have a positive affirmation that I will get a certain goal, what if I don't get that goal? And that gets to our next point, which we talk about in the book, which is this idea that there is no failure. Failure is only when you quit. Failure is an opportunity to learn, grow, and then take another shot. And as I don't remember might have been Peter Drucker. From an entrepreneurial standpoint, how do you succeed in business? Fail more. That mentality works here as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we've talked about it before, but I think sometimes in our sport we get especially because if you're marathoning, you only get a certain number of chances. We put so much pressure on each chance versus just taking some of that pressure off, recognizing that even if you don't get it, you'll learn and you'll get it the next time. You'll take another swing at it the next time. It's kind of like the skateboarding mentality, which I love. If you watch somebody do a skateboarding trick, they'll fail 100, 200 times. They might be working on that trick all day or over multiple days. Then finally they'll get it. And the skateboarder mentality isn't, oh, I just failed 200 times. Mm-hmm. Skateboarder mentality is, but I got it. Mm-hmm. And they relish in the failure because that's a part of the journey. You know, they get the epic spills and the epic opportunities to learn. And so I think we could all, as runners, use a little bit of that skateboarder mentality, but it's just reframing failure from failure as a bad thing or as an end to rather failure is a step along the process. It's an opportunity to learn along the journey.
Mm-hmm. Again, something there. Oh, I was thinking of a lot of things, but one was they had one here in Austin for a long time, but a huge billboard of good old honest Abe Lincoln saying, I failed, and then it was like ... and then I succeeded. Mm-hmm. So we got a good one in there too. But there was something else I wanted to add there. Oh, I think that, like, you know, again, when someone's struggling in that, describe the problem. Because if you can articulate the problem, or you can clearly articulate this, quote, perceived failure, then again, you're inviting yourself into an opportunity to say, what can I do about it? And you can keep going forward. And then, like you said, it's only failure if you don't keep going forward.
Right. And it's also part of that reframing that we talked about. So if you take the kind of gratitude concept to say, okay, well, if I didn't get the goal that I wanted in this race, what went wrong? And what can I learn from those mistakes? Could be didn't get my gel or fueling strategy right. Bonked a little bit. Okay, well, what does that mean? Next time I'm going to practice in training taking it at a different frequency so that I don't feel what I felt. Maybe I started too fast and therefore didn't have the staying power I wanted at the end of the race. So no problem. Don't beat yourself up over that. It's an opportunity to learn. Next time I'm going to start slower and build into the race versus starting too fast. And there's, again, infinite number of lessons that could be learned, but it's taking every one of those things that went wrong and reframing it into an opportunity to learn so that you can do it better next time. Now, I do think there's a limitation on that thought process. You don't want to overanalyze either. Mm-hmm. Analysis paralysis, as they say. But yeah, take the big obvious lessons, mm-hmm. feel the feels, and move on to the next, because it's only a failure, permanent failure, if you stop trying, as we said. So reframe failure to success. You can do that with the lessons. You can do that with the gratitude thought processes. And then that manifestation or that affirmation of I will get this goal might just be delayed a little bit. Mm-hmm. That's okay. So reframe failure as a pathway to lessons toward your eventual success. And then one of the ways that you can do that, and also I think this is maybe the closest thing to magical manifestation that there is in practice, and that is the process of visualization, which is one of my favorite tools from a running standpoint, from a life standpoint, is basically doing a dress rehearsal in your mind's eye is what visualization essentially is. We'll talk about the steps that you might go through to do it, but when you think of visualization, what do you think about?
I love that you asked me because I was so wanting to share this. Again, stole it from one of many. You'd have to find the episode on Huberman episode and his guest that talks about this. But I'm going to start with a question. But do you know the origin of the word berserk? Going berserk.
Berserk. I feel like I know, but I'm not. It's not coming top of my head.
It's from
Berserker.
The Norse culture, the Norsemen.
Yeah.
It is quite. It means to quote wear the bear shirt. This is rooted in history. This isn't even like a crazy woo-woo story. I mean, they're going to explain it from like neurological networks and like tapping into the neurological network that is attributed to rage and anger. And they would quite literally cover themselves, not with metal armor, just in the clothing of bears. And they'd eat a bunch of mushrooms and dance around fires. And they would just they would pull out of their body long before the field of neurology even existed. So they didn't know, like they didn't have the terms to describe what they were doing, but they were already doing it hundreds of years ago, where before they would go into battle and quite literally win like crazy, they would harness this energy. And it's a slight variation from simply visualizing, but it's inclusive of visualization / manifestation. And I only want athletes to wear the bear shirt in the close of a 10K or a half or in their 5K and 10K.
Right.
I don't want them doing it in practice or anything like that, because I do think that those who can tap into this, it is like a magic potion. I can't explain where it comes from. I've studied where it comes from. We can literally roll it up to neurological networks. However, this is rooted in history, and I hope people get excited and fired up about that.
Go berserk. But yes, visualization, scientifically rooted. If you're talking about the neurological pathways, essentially you visualizing in your mind's eye, doing something, whatever that doing is, it gives you similar neuromuscular response as if you had actually done the thing. So when you go do the thing, then it's somehow familiar. It's kind of like deja vu in a sense, where it's like, oh, I think I've been here before, because you've worked through it in your mind's eye. And so it's a critical step. Science backs it up. We recommend that you visualize before every race. It's a process that I like to start at least a month out, sometimes a little bit longer than that. But it can be done in different ways. It's interesting. I think it was Allison that told me she had a coach. I don't know if this was her college coach or her high school cross-country coach, would have them lay down in a classroom, turn the lights out, and then actually do a guided visualization through the race. And so that could be a way you do this. Get into a quiet room, turn the lights off. Maybe it's your bedroom. Maybe it's a family room or a living room with the lights off and laying on a couch, where you could actually then chunk the race up and visualize the various parts of it. Personally, I like to do it in the running motion. That somehow helps me go through it, and I'll just chunk up the race in small segments on recovery runs, again, starting about a month out, maybe a little bit longer than that, and think through those sections across a run usually in sequence from start to finish. And then after I'm done kind of going through it completely over several runs, then I'll often come back to different sections. Because again, getting a little bit specific here, when I visualize, I tend to have problems sometimes visualizing certain parts of the experience for whatever reason. Or maybe I run into a problem that I can't solve in one thought process. Mm-hmm. So I want to come back to it and say, okay, let me think about that again. Let me think through that again. And that relates to some of the problem solving stuff we'll talk about in this episode, later in this episode, and then the next episode. But so then I might come back to it. So you can do it in one sitting, laying on a couch in a dark room. You can do it over several runs, but break up the race in smaller chunks and, start to think through them with your mind's eye. And should be a whole body thought process and experience. It's not just what you're thinking, but what you're doing and also what you're seeing. what your senses are taking in across all senses to the extent that you can think about the smells and the touch and the energy you're feeling and all of it from a start line to the middle of the race to later segments when you're starting to struggle to the end as you close that thing out and then hopefully see your goal time on the finish line clock. So go through all of it in your mind's eye. And by the way, you can also use this for other things. I've visualized workouts before. The day before a workout where I start to have some anxiety about a tough one, I might actually visualize the workout. So it can actually be used in different contexts as well, but especially on race day or for race day.
I've never gone as far as Allison's coach, but when I was in Eugene just a couple months ago, I used my same speech pretty much every time, or the architecture of the same speech every time before a race. And then there's some course specifics that change, obviously. And then whatever I happen to be reading at the time is going to end up coming out of my mouth because it's like fresh and it's top of mind. But it's kind of those that, and I won't give the thing here. I did it like way long ago when y'all first launched the podcast, but it's like calm as a monk and then all business and then enjoy the journey and then do what you said you would do and then know your why. So those are like meta level concepts that allow you to be in a headspace. So they're sitting up way high. And I know that that's not going to change no matter how creative I try to get. And so I'm like, okay, if I want to guide them through those, then when I'm calling it out, when I was in Eugene, I was just like, all right, we have hills in this section and you're in the enjoy the journey. So you're smiling as you come up that hill. You're not giving too much, but it allows me to anchor in that same kind of psychological flow across those. When you said break it up into chunks, it triggered that memory of, I kind of use 5 sections on a full marathon. And I do pretty much the same thing on a half marathon just because, again, there's a psychological overlay that they can kind of get in that headspace and they're starting to as they're listening, they're not remembering every word I said. They're just thinking about their own race. And I'm kind of hitting a hybrid on that. Again, not as deep as Allison's coach, but similar.
Yeah. And I like the idea of tying it to the terrain that you're going to face, whether you've run the course or not. Typically you can go out and find a course video or at least imagery. You could even do a Google Maps tour doing the street view version of a race. So even if you've never been there physically, you can start to visualize some of the elements because all of that matters. There's sections of the Austin Marathon course, for example, where you have rolling hills or the big hill at mile 12 and a half. And those are milestones or landmarks in the race that will be tied to your race plan and strategy that you want to work through in your mind's eye. How am I going to feel? How am I going to approach that hill? What can I hear? Because usually in that spot, there's a bunch of people cheering. I've got a massive hill in front of me, but I've got a bunch of people cheering. Maybe I'm seeing signs. I'm backing off my pace so that I can keep my effort relatively even. What's going to be my mentality? How am I going to think about my body movements, downshifting to use my glutes more on the hill? All of that stuff, play it out in your mind's eye so that when you get there, it just happens. The body has a knowing, so to speak. And, and then of course you want to think through scenarios. What if I struggle to find a rhythm early in the race? What am I going to do? How am I going to work through that challenge? What if I start to hurt a little sooner than I want? What am I going to do at mile 17 or 18 if that starts to happen? I know I'm going to hurt at mile 23 because it's hard. So what does that look like? And how am I going to put my mantras to work in order to combat the pain that I'm feeling in the body? So all of those things, in addition to just the physical execution of the race as planned, become a part of the play in your mind. So
nothing to add there. That's good.
It's good stuff. And again, it might sound cheesy, but it really works, especially when you start to see the things that you thought about beforehand play out in real life. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say it has to be a perfect script either, because there will be new things that pop up that you hadn't visualized, that you hadn't planned. But if you've done the work to visualize the things you can't anticipate, then that'll just be an offshoot. Dealing with a new thing will just be an offshoot. and you'll have developed the skill set we want. And we'll talk about at the end of this chapter and then the next episode, next chapter is this idea of becoming a problem solver, a real-time problem solver, where you can face anything that might get thrown at you and deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you do that? A couple different ways. One is by anticipating what might go wrong and thinking through and visualizing, dealing with the things you can anticipate. And then on the other side of the unknown, it's about developing practices and tools to help you deal with the unknown. This is where we get into mantras and counting and practice of problem solving, so that you've solved one problem, you've solved them all in a sense. Because every single race I've done, and I've done over 100, and especially if you highlight the half marathons and marathons, there's been something new and different in each and every one that I didn't expect. And it's rare that they just go perfectly, especially when you're trying to get a big goal. So you want to become an expert in solving the problems along the way.
Mm-hmm. It's just making me think back to, I think I shared it in a prior episode, but it's premeditatio malarum, but quite literally thinking through, that's the premeditation of evils, but the thinking through quite literally every possible scenario that could go wrong and, quote, what I would do about it. What you're essentially doing is you're ridding yourself of fear. Like, it's causing your brain to say, that's just not that scary, because like I've already thought through like so many different elements that it's just, your brain just settles and it's like, well, again, I know exactly what to do. And when you can act, that feels pretty dang empowering.
Yep. And so there's, all the potential categories of what could go wrong. We'll talk about those in the next conversation, but we like to encourage you to think about at least a few examples in each of a handful of categories so that you can practice it in your mind's eye and then eliminate some of the potential unknown when random things do pop up. It's things like, for example, what happens if my logistics are off? Like the place I thought I could park on race day wasn't available and I had to find somewhere new. What happens if the weather's bad? What if it's hot? What if it's windy? What if it's raining? What do I do in those situations? Plan for it. Think through how you're going to deal with it. What about the people around me? What if I don't see my family where I thought I would see them? What if the person I plan to run with, I lose and have to then run on my own, or maybe they feel better than me or I feel better than them at some point in the race, and we have to figure out how to deal with that reality of separating on the course. I mean, these are all things that are potential examples, but you can think of infinite ones that you want to think about, identify as potential challenges, and then solve in your brain. And it may not be perfect, but it's just flexing that muscle, practicing that ability to have something thrown at you and deal with it. And this is where this is where some of the beauty lies to me in a race, and also where maybe people don't give themselves enough credit for success, so to speak. Like, sometimes we view success as very black and white. Did I get the time or did I not? But the person that can get the kitchen sink thrown at them and deal with those things, and then maybe not get the time they wanted, but run really well anyway, that's where some of the magic is, right? In success and defining success. And so it helps you hopefully open up that aperture too of what makes somebody a badass.
When you said the kitchen sink being thrown at him, it took me immediately back to the Columbus weekend. I don't know if that's going to recall some of your speech, and if you want to share some of that, but you had him ready. You had him ready. Because literally it was like everything was like wrong. Right?
It was hot. It was windy. It was raining. It got cold at the end. I mean, they got definitely a kitchen sink thrown at them that day. And part of the reason why they were successful, and we had a lot of good days anyway, was because of these things that we're talking about basically manifesting in the form of a team a team approach with a coach who was helping frame it up, but also teammates and individuals who are willing to execute on the exact things we're talking about: the positive self-talk, the ability to visualize, to anticipate what might go wrong and deal with it, to commit to reframing it as, no, this isn't something I should woe as me about, but rather this is something I should recognize as an opportunity and a challenge to rise to, versus a failure going in because it's going to be ugly. Right. And they did. And they were mad problem solvers on that day, because the kitchen sink and all the water in it was thrown at them that
It was
day.
rushing down the sides of the streets.
So, yeah. But yeah, it makes it sweeter. And one of the things I said in my talk before that was, how do you frame success? And I started that by saying, well, what's the opposite? What does success not look like? And one of the things I said there was, success is not just defined by one variable. We often want it to be defined by just time, but it's so much more than that. On a hot day, on a rainy, windy day, where you're running through ankle deep water in certain sections, you're not going to run your best time necessarily, although some people did. But you can still be really darn proud and really run a beautiful race and finish strong, and by adjusting and planning and executing a plan that's associated with those conditions that you might be more proud of than your PR. I think about, one of maybe my most proud race was not my fastest. It was in the Martian Marathon, and I think it was 2015, and was trying to go for a PR that day, was fit and ready for that. But then it got hot, got up into this mid 70s, and I ended up only running a couple of minutes off my PR. I think just right at 247, maybe 246 high. My PR is 245 and change. And so even though it was a hot day, executed well, ran, I think, a pretty even split that day, and still one of the races I'm most proud of, because I overcame challenging conditions to get a time that's probably on paper, if you heat adjust, my fastest marathon. So anyway, we digress. But yes, success is defined by more than just a time on the clock. And one of the ways I think you can successfully define success is, how well did I overcome? How well did I overcome? And put it in Des Linden's words, who are you on your worst day? That's perhaps more powerful than who are you on the day when everything goes your way. So with that, I think we can wrap it. What would you want as final thoughts on this episode? Your last episode with us.
I'd really like for the final words to be our words, but I'm thinking of, again, shared this on this podcast before, but two great communicators who literally help people overcome challenge. So it's one is Jocko, his concept of good, who he'll say, like, it doesn't, like, he had one of his reports call him one day and explain something went bad, and he was like, I already know what you're going to tell me. He's like, what am I going to tell you? He just says, good. Like, look at it and say good. Like, didn't get the job you want? Good. Opportunity to get better. Like, it's always this opportunity to get better. And then the reverse of it, I think Dr. Peterson, who's a great psychologist, hits this really well. He says, a perfect world, i.e. perfect world. No, not even i.e. Sorry. A world without challenge is a world without any opportunity. And if you really sit with that thought, it starts to make sense. Like, if everything in your world and in your life went exactly the way you wanted it to, and there was no obstacle, no challenge, what opportunity would there be? Challenge in and of itself is opportunity. Yeah. So it's like a built-in philosophical reframe that you don't even have to proactively try to do. They are in and of themselves a reframe.
Yeah, and it's what we sign up for. I mean, this is why people listen to this podcast. This is why people have goals. This is why those goals are meaningful to them. if it were easy, it wouldn't be worth doing.
Mm-hmm.
And, we've talked long and hard about all the physical challenges, but the mental ones can be even bigger and more palpable in many ways. And so that's why all the stuff we're talking about today is important, because you want it to be hard. You want the tough days. You want to know what you're like when everything goes against you. That's why we do this stuff. And so instead of framing that as negative or bad or disappointment, frame it as good. In Jocko's words, I get to show what I'm worth.
Yeah.
I get to show what I'm made of. And that doesn't come just by sitting on your hands. It comes by practicing all the stuff we talked about today. So there you go. That's a good final word that ended up coming from both of us. So I like it. All right, folks, quick reminder again, we'll be out for the next couple of weeks. The next episode will be back in the first week in August, as I'll be traveling the next couple of weeks. And then if you're interested in our stuff, you can check it out at roguerunning.com. We have our book there you can buy, which you can also buy in other outlets. You can also look up all the info on our coaching programs in person in Austin and Dallas areas, and then virtually, regardless of your starting point, whether you want group or one-on-one, we've got options for you. If you're not sure where to go, then just email us, coaching@roguerunning.com. And then, of course, check us out on Fridays as well when we do our Friday Q&As on the @RogueRunning Instagram, 2 p.m. Central. Bring your questions about anything there. And with that, we'll wrap this one, and we'll talk to you on the other side of this trip.